Today we're going to be presenting about a case for reparations for African Americans. Firstly, it's important to go into how we're going to define reparations. So, unfortunately, there's not one universal definition of what reparations are. However, most people believe that it's strictly a monetary thing, people getting money as a form of acknowledgement of some type of punishment. However, there's many other concepts that can apply to this. Could be stuff like social policies, economic policies, as well as like educational policies. All can fall under the label of reparations. With that in mind, the best working definition I was able to find for reparations is from Reverend Mark Thomas of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, when he stated, quote, "For many of us, reparations means spiritual repair, cultural repair, repair through the means of education, health, economics, society, all of those things together." I really like that definition because I think it gives a lot of gravitas to the different types of ways that reparations could work. And a lot of focus goes on to how it's all repair and fixing stuff and how all of it together makes for the best possible solution. So, a little bit of a history of African American reparations in the U.S. So, the major debate about this goes to what extent do African Americans deserve reparations for the way they've been treated? So, there's a lot of questions and concerns about who gets them and what form they would take, whether they'd be a monetary reparation or a different type of form of reparation, and where, if it is monetary, where the money would come from is a big concern. So, that's why a lot of the people aren't as in pro of a monetary reparation. In addition, people find it very difficult to decide whom is deserving of reparations, considering a lot of the treatment was many, many generations ago, and it's a little hard to prove. So that's why there's a lot of debate. It goes with the idea of inheritance and ascribed status. Those two things we talked about a lot in the beginning of the semester really applies here a lot. Basically, the idea is if you many generations ago were enslaved, or your family members were enslaved, you'd be unable to get the inheritance and the ascribed things that are to you that a lot of other people would, thus making you able to qualify for reparations.
Some famous examples of reparations is post-World War I, the Treaty of Versailles labeled Germany responsible for the war, forcing them to pay back everyone for it. The Holocaust was when Western Germany paid the newly established nation of Israel in order to pay them back. Apartheid. The white population in South Africa was paying back the African Americans for generations of racial discrimination and separation. The final example is Japanese internment. After Pearl Harbor, we decided to put the Asian American people in ghettos. The economics for reparations. At the 2001 World Conference Against Racism, the transatlantic slave trade was ruled illegal and unethical. African Americans requested compensation for the enslavement of their ancestors, but they were not granted any. Prior to this conference, the U.S. government provided numerous reparations to different Native American tribes, such as in 1971, when the U.S. granted $1 billion and 44 million acres of land to Alaskan Natives. Then again, in 1986, the Ottawa tribe of Michigan received $32 million for other atrocities. In addition, during the 1990s, the U.S. government offered a formal apology to Japanese Americans who were the victims of internment and other types of discrimination during World War II. The 68,000 identified victims were each paid $20,000 as a reparation.
Economics can provide useful insights in determining eligibility for reparation programs. One approach would be a lump sum payments to eligible individual African Americans. The long-term effects of reparations. Methods of financing reparations. Public finance theory suggests that non-blacks could finance the transfer by paying additional taxes, borrowing, or by lowering their spending, and the magnitude of reparations.
The next article we're going to summarize is From Slavery to Genocide, The Fallacy of Debt in the Reparations Discourse by Alan Cooper, published in 2011 in the Journal of Black Studies. Basically, Alan Cooper's argument is that reparations on a philosophical level work as a form of debt. The idea that people who are descendants of people who were enslaved are indebted to the U.S. because they did all this labor, and so they didn't get any chance for reparations or any type of payment, even though they did the hard labor, so therefore they should get those reparations. It also talks about the human rights argument of reparations and how if the acts of Jim Crow could realistically be defined as genocide according to the international definition. And Cooper then uses that argument as a way to say, well, people got reparations after the Holocaust, which was a form of genocide. So by that argument that African Americans are entitled to reparations because Jim Crow is considered genocide.
I examined the article Political Autonomy as a Form of Reparations to African Americans by Lee A. Harris, and Harris begins his article by saying that there's 3 elements to a true reparation. First, it has to attempt to eliminate racism. Second, it should be looking backward. And third, it should be group-based. He also said that all 3 of these elements all trace back to slavery, as first, racism today is rooted in the slavery that our country once went through. Second, these reparations should be looking backward because it's more than just fixing today's issues. You have to address the problem from which it originally started from. And third, it has to be group-based because obviously all the slaves are no longer with us today, but you can address African Americans as a whole instead of just those former slaves. The main purpose of his article was he wanted to compare affirmative action to political autonomy because in his opinion, affirmative action hasn't gotten the job done in society these past few years. And to do this, he compared it on 3 different levels. First, design. He said that much of African Americans' injustices lay within U.S. institutions. And so if you were just to pay back African Americans with a monetary transfer, he said it doesn't fix the underlying problems of this to find a solution. Whereas if you were to fix political problems, it would then trickle down and then affect African Americans on different levels like jobs and even potentially change the racial wealth gap. The second level that he looked at the problem was public opinion. He said affirmative action has been around for many years and it hasn't made a significant dent, whereas the race-neutral politics will have that trickle-down effect, and it could change a lot of other things in society. And then third is the legal arena, and it's really not a legal arena, it's just looking at reparations as a whole. And he said the oppression of African Americans is almost the exact same thing as the Holocaust. So he compared things like concentration camps to slavery, the propaganda to the stereotypes in the South. But the one difference was that following Hitler's reign, Germany was able to bring back Jews into society and make a lot of changes, whereas in today's society, we still struggle to fix all the racism and discrimination that African Americans go through.
The article I examined is U.S. Reparations to Descendants of Enslaved Blacks in the U.S. by J. Angelo Corlett. J. Angelo Corlett is a philosopher, so he looks at the more ethical side to reparations. The 2 types of reparations he talks about are compensatory and non-compensatory. Compensatory is obviously a direct monetary gain, and non-compensatory is a way through society that they try to change. The types of reparations that were already put in place is affirmative action, which is an example of non-compensatory because people do not see a direct financial gain from this. Why are reparations important? It acknowledges the oppression that was given, it disavows the oppression of the group, and expresses sympathy towards the group that was oppressed. The argument he creates for reparations is when a clear violation of basic rights, that calls for rectification. The U.S. committed many rights violations by the institution of slavery and Jim Crow laws. Therefore, reparations are owed. The objections of reparations that he talks about are, it is not fair to hold the U.S. government accountable for something that was happened such a long time ago, and about how it is impossible to find who is deserving of these reparations. He combats these by talking about mitochondrial DNA analysis, which allows for the analysis of where a person's ancestors were from. In conclusion, reparations are owed by the U.S. for the institution of slavery and Jim Crow laws. Also, big businesses who are still in business today owe for their use of slaves and the growing of their massive businesses. And he says the best way to go about this is through a combination of monetary compensation and non-monetary compensation.
Some recommendations that are good ways to pay back those who deserve reparations include tax larger businesses like Google, Amazon, Apple, and give it to those that should receive reparations. Policies to help allow for less disparity within high-paying jobs. College scholarships. This could be extremely helpful because these scholarships can take a major chunk off that college tuition. Stricter enforcement of the Fair Housing Act to ensure that black families have better access to high-income neighborhoods and schools.
Discussion questions. Do you think the 3 elements of reparations are an accurate representation of the exigence of why reparations are necessary? Why or why not? Should reparations be exclusively monetary, or should there be other forms of repayment? Who should be accountable for these reparations? Should it be a government or another group? What should they have to do?